I never thought I'd find myself comparing a violet-eyed legend from the golden age of Hollywood to a millennial star raised on Disney and paparazzi flashbulbs, but the deeper I looked, the more the parallels started stacking up. When I first heard people mention Elizabeth Taylor and Lindsay Lohan in the same breath, I really didn't think there was much there beyond the usual tabloid shorthand: two famous women, two messy headlines, end of story. But that wasn't the whole story. Once I lined up their timelines, their habits, and the way the world reacted to them, it felt like I was reading the same script performed decades apart. Not identical lives, of course, but eerily similar beats: a dazzling rise, relentless scrutiny, spirals in public, and defiant attempts to rewrite the ending. If you've ever wondered why some stars seem fated to repeat history, these two might be the clearest example I've seen. Elizabeth Taylor grew up on studio lots where school happened between takes, and childhood looked like a costume change. She was barely 10 when National Velvet turned her into a phenomenon, and from that moment, adults were choreographing her every move. It's easy to romanticize those black and white photos, but behind the glossy stills was a teenager learning to hit her marks instead of learning how to be a kid. Lindsay Lohan's start had a different texture: modern, neon, fast. The Parent Trap put her on the map at 11, then Freaky Friday and Mean Girls stamped her as the real deal: funny, sharp, luminous. What struck me looking back is how both girls were praised for being so professional, which is a nice way of saying the grown-up machine loved how easily they could act like adults. I never thought about what that steals from you until I followed the pattern. When you become reliable before you finished middle school, the line between who you are and who you perform gets blurry. That blur turns out to be the opening chapter for everything that follows, and what followed would push both of them far past ordinary teenage mistakes. Taylor's life unfolded in headlines that felt like movie posters: romances, illnesses, demons, divorces. The public kept score with morning papers and primetime news. Lohan's life unfolded in push notifications. Where Elizabeth dealt with columnists and flashes from boxy cameras, Lindsay dealt with blogs refreshing every minute, airport ambushes, and a swarm of lenses that never needed to reload film. Different instruments, same orchestra. I really didn't think the pressure could be that similar across eras, but the rhythm was identical. Every outing was a potential scandal, every friend a potential source, every stumble a story. Taylor became a recurring character in the culture long before celebrity culture had a name. Lohan became the template for the internet-age celebrity whose lowest moments loop on autoplay. Both were covered like breaking news in real time, but neither got time to break in private. And when the world watches like that, the person you are at breakfast can be a headline by dinner, setting up the next, darker parallel you probably saw coming. This is where the glamour goes quiet. Elizabeth Taylor spent years wrestling with pills that were first prescribed to help her sleep, to ease pain, to steady the storm. In her era, people whispered exhaustion and nerves while she tried to breathe through the weight of it. Decades later, Lindsay Lohan's struggle with drinking and drugs played out so publicly that it became a meme factory. I never thought I'd feel protective of two women I've never met, but reading those old clippings and watching those old clips made me wince. We're so quick to label, so quick to laugh, and so slow to ask what pushed them to reach for relief in the first place. It's not an excuse, it's a context. Fame is a pressure cooker, and both stars learned to mask the steam until the lid rattled. Elizabeth kept working between crises, Lindsay kept smiling between setbacks. Different decades, same ache. And once that ache becomes your public identity, it's almost impossible to step out of it without the next parallel, trying to get help while the world treats help like a spectacle. When Elizabeth Taylor checked herself into treatment, it was revolutionary. An A-list star naming a struggle that everyone else guarded with euphemisms. She made something private into something honest, and even that honesty got turned into headlines. Lindsay Lohan's treatment cycles happened under floodlights. Arrivals filmed, departures dissected, and progress measured by paparazzi shots instead of by doctors. I really didn't think the world could make recovery harder, but we almost dared both women to heal while we watched. Like recovery was a reality show with commercial breaks. The strange symmetry here isn't just that both went to rehab, it's that both had to fight two battles at once, the internal one with dependency and the external one with the narrative. Every step forward became public property. Every slip backward became a punchline, and through it all, both kept trying. But recovery doesn't erase another storm the public loves to track: love stories that refuse to stay tidy. Elizabeth Taylor's love life could have been its own studio franchise. 8 marriages to 7 men, with Richard Burton as the sequel and the reboot. She fell in love loudly, she got hurt loudly, and somehow audiences took it personally, as if her heart owed them a plot twist they approved of. Lindsay's relationships, though fewer and not sealed with vows, were examined with the same forensic intensity: who she dated, who she unfollowed, who she texted at 2 a.m., what it meant. I never thought romance could be audited like a tax return, but both women had lovers turned into case studies. The difference is the times. Taylor's scandals were printed once and then folded into memory. Lohan's were archived forever and resurfaced by search bars. Same stereotypes, same labels, same certainty from strangers who weren't there. And when love becomes content, it bleeds into the next headline. Scandal isn't an accident anymore, it's a product line. Taylor was dragged for the Fisher-Reynolds triangle, then dragged again for the diamonds that followed, then dragged again for refusing to apologize for being the center of attention. And yet, every drag seemed to magnetize the world closer. She didn't plan a scandal, but she didn't shrink from it either. She learned to survive inside it. Lindsay's scandals, late nights, public spats, reckless choices, were amplified by a culture that had learned how to traffic chaos for clicks. I used to roll my eyes at some of those stories, then I noticed how many of them were the same story told in a louder font. The parallel isn't that they loved scandal, it's that scandal loved them because we did. Outrage is a currency, and both women were minted on it. But outrage also invites something more official and less forgiving. Elizabeth's era hid the ugliest details behind polite phrases, but the consequences were real: hospitalizations, interventions, studio panic over whether she could work. Lindsay's era printed everything in bold: citations, court dates, ankle monitors, probation hearings. If Taylor's crises were veiled, Lohan's were streamed. I really didn't think public accountability could turn into public spectacles so easily, but both women became cautionary tales on cue. What gets lost in the court chatter is what legal storms do to careers. It's not just fines and restrictions. It's a reputation that gets stapled to your name in every meeting. Which brings us to the next mirror image: talent that can open any door and trouble that quietly changes the locks. Both women hit points where casting directors saw risk before they saw promise. With Taylor, illness and turmoil halted productions, shut down sets, and made studios sweat through budgets. Cleopatra became a synonym for too big to fail and too chaotic to finish, until she finished it and wore the crown like it had been waiting for her. With Lohan, rumors of no-shows, delays, and insurance worries scared projects away. I never thought the industry could forget this quickly, but Hollywood is a short memory town until it's a long memory town, and the memory it keeps is your worst day. And yet, this is crucial, both had performances that reminded everyone why they were famous in the first place. Elizabeth could turn a jagged script into a living nerve. Lindsay could flick from comedy to ache in a single look. Interruptions didn't erase ability, they just made ability harder to trust, which is why the next act in both stories felt inevitable. The comeback tour, version after version, until one finally sticks. If Elizabeth Taylor's first legacy was beauty and scandal, her second was resilience and purpose. She built businesses that outlived trends and channeled her name into causes that actually changed lives. That pivot didn't happen overnight. It was a long, stubborn climb from messy headlines to meaningful headlines. Lindsay's redemptions have come in waves: new roles, new projects, a surprise holiday rom-com that reminded people she still had star wattage to spare. I never thought I'd see the internet collectively soften toward her, but it did, because talent and time can sand down even the sharpest edges. The parallel here isn't perfection, it's persistence. Both women understood that you don't convince people you've changed by saying it once. You keep showing up until the picture changes, and every time it almost changes, the same obstacle rises again with a familiar click: cameras waiting at your car door. Taylor and Richard Burton were followed like a royal tour without a palace, their every kiss and quarrel pasted into papers as if they belonged to the public. Lindsay's daily life turned into a route map for photographers. Airports, studios, court steps, coffee runs, routine became content. When I first watched those old reels side by side, I really didn't think the footage would feel so similar. Flashbulbs don't care what decade they're in. The lens wants the moment where you look least ready. Both women adapted: giant sunglasses, practiced half smiles, a kind of armor you wear on your face. But armor is heavy. Carry it long enough and you start to feel numb, which leads to the parallel that, for me, lands like a quiet confession. For all the chaos, both women kept one unbreakable thread: people could not deny what they were on a screen. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just beautiful, she was volcanic. When she raised her voice, a room shrank. When she broke, you could hear the snap. Awards don't always prove greatness, but in her case, they felt inevitable. Lindsay Lohan, in her best roles, felt just as inevitable. Those clever beats in Mean Girls, those heart-tug pulls in Freaky Friday, the way she could anchor a scene without announcing herself. I never thought two careers divided by 50 years could generate the same reaction in me, but there it was. That little jolt of, oh right, she's special. Beauty opened doors for both. Talent kept the doors from closing even when everything else said they should. And yet, even undeniable talent struggles to breathe when the air around you is always buzzing with judgment. Somewhere along the way, both women learned the same survival trick. You stop letting every headline pierce you. Taylor joked about it, wore it like a shawl, and kept moving. Lohan said it plainly, there comes a point when you go numb. I really didn't think numbness could be healthy until I realized it isn't meant to be. It's just a cushion you borrow when the floor is concrete. Numbness keeps you from shattering in the moment so you can figure out how to live in the morning. It's not surrender, it's triage, and yet it carries a cost. When you tune out the noise, you can accidentally tune out the music too. That's why the final parallel matters most to me. Not a headline, not a scandal, but a question of legacy that both women have wrestled with in public view. When I stack these parallels together, child stardom, life under glass, substance struggles, rehab, chaotic romance, scandal storms, legal fallout, stalled work, comeback attempts, camera traps, undeniable talent, and the slow slide into numbness. I don't see two cliches. I see two human beings trying to survive a job that eats its young. Elizabeth Taylor ultimately found a way to turn the tornado into a wind she could harness. Business, advocacy, lifelong icon status. Lindsay Lohan's story is still being written, but the pages have started to read differently. Steadier, lighter, more in her control. Maybe that's the real gift of seeing these parallels clearly. We stop pretending the past is a museum and admit it's a mirror. I never thought I'd say it, but in the ways that matter, Elizabeth and Lindsay could have been sisters, separated by decades, united by the strange physics of fame. And that leaves me with one last thought. If Hollywood keeps handing certain actors the same script, rise fast, fall loudly, climb slowly, maybe the bravest thing a star can do is refuse the third act everyone expects. Taylor proved the end can be rewritten. Lindsay is proving a middle can be steadied. The rest is up to her. And to us, because audiences help write these endings too. We decide whether to watch for the stumble or wait for the turn. Me? I'm choosing to wait for the turn. What about you? The reason these parallels matter isn't to relive old gossip, it's to understand how fame repeats itself like a looped chorus. When I first lined up their timelines, it felt like finding two copies of the same map drawn in different ink. The roads were different. Studios then, streaming now, but the destinations kept matching. Pressure, escape, fallout, reinvention. That's why I'm walking you through the echoes, one by one, so you can hear how loud they ring. Taylor's studio schooling meant she learned diction and discipline before she learned freedom. Teachers on set coached precision. Publicists coached poise. On the other side of the century, Lohan learned choreography for press junkets and social media before she learned how to keep parts of herself private. When I watch The Parent Trap today, I see a kid with timing most adults never find. That kind of promise is a gift and a debt. The industry collects with interest. Taylor's day could swing from a hospital visit to a premiere, and the papers framed both as spectacle. Lohan's day could start with a coffee run and end as a trending topic. What surprised me most is how both eras rewarded the same thing: availability. The less you hid, the more you became a headline, and when you tried to hide, someone sold the map. It's easy to moralize from the cheap seats. Harder to admit that pressure turns rest into pills and fun into escape. Taylor's doctors wrote prescriptions the way very busy people accept shortcuts. The slippery slope hid under professional language. Lohan's era didn't hide anything. Every misstep carried a timestamp, a camera angle, and a chorus of strangers ready with jokes. Somewhere in between those extremes is the quiet truth. Help is hard to ask for when the world is scoring your pain. The strange thing about public recovery is that it invites commentary on progress that isn't linear. One good week becomes a victory lap. One bad day becomes the fall. Taylor faced that pattern with a kind of stubborn dignity, showing up again, apologizing when needed, and trying to do better without narrating every struggle. Lohan faced it in an age where silence was treated as guilt. I never thought I'd see treatment centers turned into paparazzi stakeouts, but that's the timeline we lived through. Taylor loved it with the volume stuck at 11. She chased big feelings and paid big prices, and people mistook vulnerability for vanity. Lindsay's relationships were framed as plotlines rather than private choices, which means every disagreement looked like a season finale. What both women teach me is that love isn't safer just because you're famous. It's louder, and when love gets loud, the crowd thinks it's invited. Here's the secret no one likes to admit. Scandal is the easiest currency in entertainment. It spends fast and buys attention on demand. Taylor endured it long before the internet monetized outrage. Lohan lived through the algorithmic version, where chaos becomes a business model. Neither woman was a saint, but neither deserved to be turned into a brand of disaster. I really didn't think we'd still glamorize the bonfire while pretending to be shocked by the smoke. Courtrooms are terrible stages. There's no flattering light, no second take, just a docket and decisions. Taylor's consequences unfolded mostly off camera, filtered by studio statements. Lohan's unfolded like a serialized docudrama. If you tracked only the headlines, you'd miss the grind of trying to rebuild a life with a file full of fines and conditions. Redemption has paperwork. It has curfews. It has people who stop returning your calls. Yet talent has a way of knocking on the same doors it once had to beg to enter. Taylor clawed back with performances that forced critics to put their pens down and pay attention. Lohan, when she's locked in, still carries scenes like the camera owes her rent. What derails them isn't the work. It's everything around the work. I never thought I'd say this, but sometimes the job is the easy part. The most underrated tool in any comeback is time. Not a headline, not a viral moment, time. Taylor used hers to build, to apologize, to show up for causes bigger than herself. Lohan is using hers to steady, to choose selectively, to re-enter at a tempo she can actually sustain. It's not flashy, which is exactly why it might work. There's a shot of Taylor shielding her eyes from a storm of flashes that could be swapped with a shot of Lindsay doing the same half a century later. Same pose, same wince, same equation. Human being versus public appetite. Cameras don't ask if you slept. They don't care if you're late because you were crying in a parking lot. They want your worst angle and your startled face. That's the frame that travels fastest. Beauty gave both women access. Talent gave them longevity. Taylor could scorch a room with one-line reading. Lohan can turn a throwaway reaction into the moment everyone quotes on the way out. That's why people keep making space for them after storms. Instinct can't be taught, and audiences recognize it even when critics pretend not to. Becoming numb isn't bravery, but it can be a bridge to it. You detach so you can survive the day. Then you use the quiet to rebuild. I used to think numbness meant not caring. Now, I think it means caring in private until it's safe to care in public again. The parallels aren't there to crown one woman and scold the other. They're there to show us the machine. Fame offers a ladder with missing rungs, then films the fall. Taylor climbed anyway. Lindsay is still climbing. If they could be sisters, it's not because they look alike. It's because they learned the same survival grammar.